I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed." Following that, my mother-in-law added, "Useless ones should just get divorced and leave." Uttering such harsh words, my father-in-law joined in, realizing the situation. He yelled, "A wife who can't have kids doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Ryan and let him marry Agnes." Silently standing there, I was speechless. It was the first time in my life I felt so utterly miserable. But at the same time, a firm resolve solidified within me. The time had come for me to fight back. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze in shock. They probably thought I'd be hurt and on the verge of tears. Defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, you know, and that woman." At my words, my parents-in-law and Ryan gasped in disbelief. Uttering pitiful voices, they trembled as they faced this astonishing truth. My name is Margaret, a 31-year-old part-time housewife. I married Ryan 3 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. At 28, when we got married, I was a full-time employee poised for a promising career path. If I continued working, I wanted to build my career until I was 30 and then, once childbirth and parenting had settled, return to a job-friendly environment. Ryan understood this, and we agreed to start trying for a baby after I turned 30. When the time came, having seen a friend struggle with infertility, I decided to get tested just in case. The result revealed my infertility, leading me to switch to part-time work to focus on treatment. Ryan worked in a real estate company, and his take-home pay was more than enough for the two of us. Since we could save a little every month, Ryan was okay with me switching to part-time work. But that's when my nightmare began. Once he knew about my infertility and my change to part-time, Ryan's attitude completely shifted. He had been kind before, but suddenly he said, "I'm a full-timer, you're part-time, so you should take care of all the household chores. Without my income, we can't even afford infertility treatments, let alone live comfortably. To avoid stressing me out, you need to handle all the housework perfectly." I was good at housework since my days living alone, so it wasn't too painful at first. But Ryan started nitpicking over everything. If the room was even slightly messy, he'd yell, "You're lazy. How can a housewife live in such filth?" And if the dishes weren't washed right after a meal, he'd say, "A woman who procrastinates like this isn't cut out for family life. But work more, earn your keep. There's remote work and stuff, right? You could find something. But remember, all the housework is still your responsibility. You're part-time, I'm full-time." At this time, I was still reeling from the shock of my infertility, thinking it was all my fault. I wanted to create a relaxing environment at home for Ryan, who was tired from work, so I tried to meet his expectations. Looking back, I realized I was just giving in to him, telling myself it was just patience until we have a child. I hoped that once we had a child, Ryan would return to his kinder self. Clinging to this hope, I continued juggling part-time work, housework, and infertility treatments. But the strain took its toll. I fell ill, the treatments weren't going well, and our relationship worsened. Gradually, I couldn't keep up with the housework and became more emotional. "You can't even get pregnant and still act all high and mighty. If you don't want a divorce, listen to me," he said, looking down on me. From then on, even a simple request to put his socks in the laundry basket was met with a shout of, "Shut up." I was just trying to make a point, but his contempt made me feel miserable and unsure of what to do next. He started treating me not as a wife but as a convenient woman or a servant. My spirit withered under this treatment. A year passed in this way without a child, and the gap between us remained. This year since becoming part-time and starting the treatment seemed to fly by, yet it was the most difficult time of my life. However, recently there's been a change. Ryan suddenly became kind, not just a little but a significant shift. It was as if he was a different person, showing increased concern for me. For instance, when infertility treatments weren't going well, and I was feeling down, Ryan asked, "You okay? How about I make dinner tonight? I'll whip up your favorite beef stew." It was a mix of happiness and suspicion. After looking down on me so much, this sudden kindness felt like he had a hidden agenda, making me doubtful. So I casually asked Ryan, "What's up? Anything good happened recently?" He relaxed and said, "Yeah, work's going great. I got selected for a big project, but I might be away from home more as I need to have more meetings with the team." Up to this point, it was fine. My physical burden lessened, and Ryan's career success meant a secure future. Accepting his kindness without suspicion would mean no trouble. But there was one thing bothering me. Recently, Ryan had been overly curious about my activities. I asked him, "What's up with you lately? You used to be so uninterested in what I was doing." Suddenly, he snapped, "What's wrong with wanting to know about my wife's activities, Margaret? Are you doing something behind my back that you can't tell me?" His reaction seemed odd to me. Maybe he was being nice to cover up something he couldn't tell me. A recently divorced friend had told me about her husband becoming nice just before she discovered his affair. So I started suspecting Ryan's infidelity and began observing his movements. While he kept track of my schedule, I noticed a pattern. Ryan regularly went out for drinks on Tuesdays and played golf on the second Sunday of every month. He'd answer normally about other days, but on those specific days, if I asked where he went, he'd get angry, saying, "Damn it, stop nagging me, you're so annoying." It was suspicious. I grew more convinced Ryan might be cheating and decided to take serious action. A few weeks later, needing a break from this covert battle, I went on a little trip. It was a 20-minute drive from home to a cafe that had recently opened and caught my interest. Despite hearing about long lines, I didn't mind waiting alone, so I went there and waited for my turn. That's when I bumped into my sister-in-law. She's a 29-year-old cheerful and kind daycare worker, 2 years younger than me. She always looked up to me like a real sister, and I adored her like my own sibling. When I greeted her, my sister-in-law was startled and looked me up and down in a way she never did. Confused by her strange behavior, I tilted my head. "What's wrong?" Snapped out of it, my sister-in-law blinked, and after a moment of silence, she brightened up and said, "Margaret, let's have lunch together." So we changed the number of people on the reservation and sat together after waiting for several minutes. During lunch, my sister-in-law told me an unbelievable fact that left me speechless and unable to eat. After lunch, instead of going home as planned, I decided to change my plans. I decided to visit my parents-in-law's house with my sister-in-law. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from our apartment, where I currently live, so I don't usually stop by. My parents-in-law aren't exactly fond of me, so I don't see them often, only during the holidays or for memorial services. This would be a rare visit. It was just a little over 10 minutes from the cafe. My sister-in-law, who lives alone and only occasionally visits home, usually informs my mother-in-law when she's coming. But today we decided to go there without notice. It's the second Sunday of the month. Ryan should be at his usual business golf, but strangely, when we arrived at my parents-in-law's house, his car was there. My sister-in-law unlocked the door, and as we entered, I whispered a small hello. My mother-in-law came out and asked with a puzzled look, "What's Margaret doing here?" Her tone was clearly unpleasant just because I visited. She took this attitude simply because a daughter-in-law dropped by the house. I barely managed to hold back a sigh. Then, from the back of the house, I heard voices. Ryan and a woman appeared. Ryan looked shocked for a moment, but the woman cheerfully said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Agnes, the future wife of Ryan." As I stood there dumbfounded, my sister-in-law, with an angry expression, confronted them. "Hey, what's going on here? Explain this." Ryan sighed deeply, then looking down on me, he said something shocking. "I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed." Following that, my mother-in-law added, "Useless ones should just get divorced and leave," uttering such harsh words. Oddly, I was the only one who remained calm and rational, in contrast to my trembling sister-in-law who seemed both angry and sad. Meanwhile, Ryan, Agnes, and my mother-in-law looked down on me without any sign of remorse. Then my father-in-law, hearing the commotion, came in and quickly understood the situation. He yelled, "A wife who can't have kids doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Ryan and let him marry Agnes." "Dad," my sister-in-law shouted, trying to stop him, but I slowly raised my head. It was time for my counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I'd be hurt and on the verge of tears, but defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, you know." My parents-in-law and Ryan were astonished. They could only utter a pathetic "ha" in response. I had the urge to reveal Agnes's true identity right then and there, but instead, I sighed and said, "Ryan, do you remember the recent fuss you made about divorcing me? You'd even filled out the divorce papers. Those papers were signed by you, so I filled in my part, submitted them, and consulted a lawyer. Whether you realize it or not, we're already divorced. We're not a couple anymore." Ryan seemed to recall that incident and lost his previously composed demeanor. His eyes darted around, clearly showing his agitation. A few days ago, Ryan and I had an argument, and in a fit of rage, he signed the divorce papers and threatened me. The argument was over something trivial. I had simply asked him again where he goes every second Sunday. It was time to get to the heart of the matter. Ryan, red-faced, yelled, "You're always asking such things. Do you want to tie me down?" "I'm not having it." It was his usual angry outburst. I pointed out that it was strange for him to get so worked up just because I asked about his whereabouts on the second Sunday. Still, Ryan kept nagging and stormed out of the house. Later, he came back with the divorce papers, filled his part out hastily, and pushed them at me, saying, "I can divorce you anytime." When I asked if he really intended to divorce, Ryan nodded firmly, so I secretly filled in my part and kept the papers in my bag, ready to submit at any time. They were like a talisman, a magical paper that could end my marriage with Ryan if anything happened. Today, after a shocking conversation with my sister-in-law and reaching my limit, I stopped at the office to submit the papers before visiting my parents-in-law. Ryan, hearing this, said, "That was just a threat. I didn't mean it." But my sister-in-law retorted, "You signed it yourself, saying you could divorce anytime. That clearly shows your intent." Ryan fell silent again. I sarcastically said to Ryan, "So we're practically no longer a couple." Happy now, he opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, my mother-in-law interjected with a smug look. "Oh, is that so? Well, divorcing you was always the plan, so that's fine, isn't it?" My father-in-law seemed to agree with her, nodding his head. From their perspective, my divorce from Ryan was inevitable sooner or later, so they thought, why not now? Their true feelings were evident, suggesting that the divorce was a positive outcome for Ryan anyway. Standing next to Ryan, Agnes was also just smirking annoyingly. Noticing this, Ryan chuckled slightly and said, "Yeah, that's right. Our divorce is the first step towards me being with Agnes." It was a skin-crawling statement. Our younger sister-in-law looked embarrassed by this scene, maybe ashamed of these four. For me, holding back laughter at this foolish family and Agnes was a challenge, ignoring their triumphant looks. I operated my smartphone and showed them a photo. It was clear evidence of Ryan and Agnes's affair, pinpointing the place and time in just one shot. "I didn't file for divorce on a whim," I told Ryan. "I've gathered all the evidence of your affair from the start." Seeing him gulp at my words, I glanced at him as Agnes suddenly burst into laughter. Frowning, I looked at Agnes as she blurted out, "So you've thoroughly investigated me too? That woman you almost mentioned, I guess you figured her out. Were you going to reveal that she's pregnant? Too bad. Ryan and his parents know it and deliberately let me stay here." Hearing this, our sister-in-law was shocked. She had been told by Ryan and their parents that we were divorced when we met at the cafe. The reason for the divorce was particularly shocking. They said I was terminally ill with little time left and that I initiated the breakup. They seemed tearful and surprised by my sudden appearance at the cafe. My sister-in-law thought she was hallucinating, hence her strange behavior, which she apologized for. Hearing their story, I was appalled. Ryan had lied about separating from his wife due to a made-up illness. He told his sister, "Margaret is now despairing in life, so please don't contact her and accidentally upset her." Believing this, my sister-in-law refrained from reaching out to me. However, upon returning home, she was surprised to find a strange woman living there whom my parents-in-law introduced as Ryan's new wife. Until now, my sister-in-law realized she had been deceived, but she was hearing for the first time about Agnes's pregnancy. In response to Agnes's smug attitude, I burst out laughing. After my laughter subsided, I spoke to a stunned Agnes. "Of course, I knew you were pregnant. My detective had already clued me in, but I figured Ryan and his parents living here with you must know too. So I brought something even more interesting," I said, and the atmosphere immediately tensed. Everyone held their breath in a hushed silence, wondering what revelation was coming next. Agnes looked at me anxiously, waiting for me to speak. When I finally did speak, the quiet was shattered and the situation took a drastic turn. "What I wanted to say is, the child you're pregnant with, Agnes, it's not Ryan's. It's from another man." Immediately, sweat formed on Agnes's forehead, and her expression became rigid. Ryan, speechless, could only mutter, "What?" His parents, confused, slowly turned their gaze towards Agnes. Before our marriage, I had spent my savings on a detective, asking them to gather conclusive evidence and information that would be advantageous for me post-divorce. Normally, it would have been just providing photographic evidence, but I requested several extras. I wanted photos that clearly showed the date and time, and detailed investigative reports recorded at every step. In fact, I had already gathered enough evidence to confront Ryan and demand alimony on the day of the divorce petition. I knew why he only went out on Tuesdays and the second Sunday of every month. Those were Agnes's days off at her job. Ryan dug his own grave by writing the divorce papers himself, handing me an unexpected win. I had enough evidence to corner Ryan, but I thought it was too early. The detective had mentioned a dark shadow lingering around Agnes, so I asked for a more detailed investigation into her. It turned out she was indeed pregnant, and Ryan knew about it. This was somewhat expected. However, Agnes insisted on going to the doctor alone, stubbornly refusing to bring Ryan along. He seemed indifferent, but Agnes had a clear intention: to keep her other boyfriend, a married man with kids, from suspecting anything. It turns out the child is definitely his. This married man, unable to be with Agnes due to his family, agreed to cover all costs for prenatal care to childbirth and even pay a lump sum in child support to end their affair. The agreement was that once the baby was born and if a test confirmed it was his child, he would pay child support and settle their relationship. That's why that man always accompanied Agnes to the hospital, leaving no room for Ryan to get involved. Ryan, used to me attending fertility clinic appointments alone, didn't suspect anything different. I had collected evidence of Agnes going into the clinic with another man and even had decisive audio data, all stored on my smartphone. I presented all this evidence right there. Agnes's face gradually turned pale, and her hands trembled slightly. Ryan, filled with anger, confronted Agnes, yelling, "Did you deceive me?" His parents were doing the same. I thought it was too much to gang up on a pregnant woman, so I intervened. "Enough. You're all embarrassing. You're all just as bad." Ryan, who cheated, his parents, who condoned it, and Agnes planning to divorce Ryan and raise another married man's child. All of you are behaving disgracefully. This is nothing but a low-level quarrel. After my outburst, everyone fell silent, unable to respond. There was no turning back now. I was resolved. Knowing Agnes's shocking secret, these people were unlikely to live together anymore. But I couldn't forgive Ryan for looking down on me while I was struggling with infertility treatments and then pretending to be kind to avoid suspicion after his affair. I've divorced Ryan, and I'm going to make sure you all pay for your sins. Agnes, you now have to raise 2 children alone, but you brought this upon yourself. So face the consequences. When I said this casually, Agnes turned even paler. "You knew I had another child? How? Where did you?" she stammered, unable to finish her sentence. Ryan and his parents furrowed their brows even deeper as I started explaining. For clarity, Agnes is a single mother, but her older child is being raised by her parents. They give her some money, but with another child coming, things will change. Her parents are getting older, and she's been looking for a man to act as an ATM to help with childcare. I have evidence of her laughing about this with friends. Realizing that the term ATM was a veiled reference to himself, Ryan looked hurt, though he had no right to feel that way. His parents were flustered, and his mother, losing her earlier composure, said in a panic, "So Agnes's child isn't our grandchild? Then there's no reason for her to stay in this house. Leave right now." Agnes, in her desperation, started making excuses. "No, it is Ryan's child. Please believe me." But my sister-in-law, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Now you think we'll believe that, Agnes? Don't you realize the mess you've made of people's lives?" Agnes fell silent at her sharp words. Then my sister-in-law dropped another bombshell. "Aren't you the mom of the boy who goes to our nursery? The one always dropped off by his elderly grandparents. His name wouldn't happen to be Jason, would it?" Agnes's eyes widened, and though she opened her mouth to respond, no words came out. Her silence confirmed my sister-in-law's suspicions. Shocked, my mother-in-law collapsed on the spot while my father-in-law looked between us, frantic. It was time to wrap things up. I presented Ryan with an ultrasound photo and said, "Thanks to fertility treatments, I'm pregnant with your child. I was going to tell you soon. But then the morning sickness got worse and your affair became certain. But make no mistake, this child is yours. We won't live together, but I expect you to pay child support in full." Ryan looked despairing, but his brazen mother raised her head and started, "If you're having a child, you're still fit to be his wife. We were just misled by this woman. Apologize, and Margaret, please stay." I ignored my mother-in-law and turned to leave. When she kept calling after me, I turned back just once. "What are you doing? You never liked me from the start. When you found out Agnes was pregnant with Ryan's child, what did you do? Your audacity knows no bounds. Stunned by my retort, something I'd never done before, my mother-in-law looked down again. My father-in-law, perhaps realizing their folly, said nothing more. I had already decided I didn't need to be recognized as their daughter-in-law, especially since they had discarded me. As I stepped outside, our sister-in-law apologized repeatedly, asking if there was anything she could do. I replied, just make sure they don't flee. I'm going to keep my distance from Ryan and communicate through a lawyer. And from now on, let's keep in touch as friends. She looked surprised but then nodded, saying, let's get through this together. Later, I hired a lawyer and went through the division of property. They whined about not being able to pay the substantial amount. But when I said I'd pursue this to the end in court with no mercy, they reluctantly agreed. As for Agnes, her affair with the married man came to light, leading to a heated argument. The turmoil grew too large, eventually reaching his wife's ears, and things did not end smoothly. Agnes, in desperation, turned to her parents for help. Naturally, they were furious with her and dragged her to us to apologize. After giving birth, Agnes will have no choice but to work tirelessly from dawn to dusk, unlikely to ever have the chance to engage in infidelity again. Despite having children, Agnes had been irresponsibly carefree, but now her parents control all her earnings, leaving her no room for stress relief. Having lived selfishly until now, she should start living for her children. Meanwhile, Ryan's fate turned out to be a mess as well. He eventually had to sell his family home to raise child support. Now he's living in a cramped, rundown apartment with his parents, barely getting by. I initially agreed to let him pay child support in installments, but as expected, he fell behind, thinking he could get away with it, probably based on something he read online. He was mistaken. I had warned I would be relentless. I immediately took legal action, enforcing payment through the courts. This led to his employer finding out about the divorce and his child support delinquency. His previous actions of leaving work early under the pretense of supporting his wife's fertility treatment, only to spend time with Agnes, also came to light, subjecting him to scorn. Eventually, he quit his job and paid the child support in full with a loan, plunging him into a lifetime of debt. Ryan's parents, too, were caught in the fallout. Now Ryan works solely to pay off his debts, and his parents, unable to enjoy a comfortable retirement, had to return to work. Their daily irresponsible arguments, blaming each other, even led to the police being called for being a neighborhood nuisance. Now they're quietly working to manage their debt, complaining as they do. As for me, I went back to my parents' house, apologized, and decided to live with them for a while after the birth. With their support, things started to look up. Soon, my former employer offered me a full-time position again. My sister-in-law, working at the daycare, agreed to take care of my daughter, giving me some peace of mind. Now, as a single mother living independently from my parents, I'm managing well. Thanks to the support and kind words from those around me, I've resolved to cherish these invaluable relationships and raise my daughter to be a wonderful person.